It was a chilly autumn morning in a small coastal town. The streets were quiet, wrapped in a layer of mist that clung to the cobblestone roads, the kind of silence that only a small sleepy town could offer. Mia, a woman in her early 40s, stood by the large bay windows of a charming beachside cottage. Her coffee mug steamed in her hands, the rich aroma filling the air as she stared out at the gray sky and the waves crashing against the rocks. It was the kind of peaceful morning she had always dreamed of when she and her husband, Ben, decided to leave the hectic pace of the city behind. But the calm was only skin deep. Ben had already left for the day, working as a freelance writer, leaving Mia alone in the cottage. Her stepson, Max, was still asleep in the guest room. Max, who was now 25, had come to stay with them for a few weeks while he worked on a project nearby. He had always been a reserved young man, but recently, Mia had noticed subtle changes in their interactions. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her pulse quicken. As Mia stood there lost in thought, she heard the soft creak of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Max, wearing a loose sweater and dark jeans, his hair still damp from the shower. He gave her a sleepy smile, the kind that used to remind her of when he was a shy teenager. But now, his broad shoulders and confident stride had replaced the boyish awkwardness she remembered. "Good morning, Mia," he said, his deep voice still groggy but warm. "Morning, Max," she replied, trying to sound normal, but she could feel the heavy tension in the air, thick and undeniable. Max made his way to the kitchen, his presence filling the room. Mia couldn't help but notice how much he had changed, how much more of a man he had become. As he reached for the coffee pot, their hands brushed for a brief moment, and Mia's heart skipped a beat. She quickly pulled back, trying to steady her breathing, but Max didn't seem to notice. "You sleep well?" Mia asked, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "Yeah, pretty well. The sound of the ocean helps," he said, smiling as he poured himself a cup of coffee. His eyes met hers, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Mia quickly turned back to the window, trying to mask the nervous energy coursing through her. She had always thought of Max as Ben's son, but lately every glance, every touch, felt too personal, too dangerous. "Is Ben coming back soon?" Max asked, pulling her from her thoughts. "Not until later this evening," she said, relieved for a moment. The thought of Ben being around offered her some comfort, but deep down, Mia knew it wouldn't change the tension hanging between her and Max. Max nodded, sipping his coffee, and the silence in the room was heavy with unspoken words. Every time Mia looked at him, it was impossible to ignore the change in him. The quiet, reserved young man she had helped raise was gone. In his place stood someone more confident, more powerful, and she wasn't sure how to deal with it. Max glanced at her again, this time his eyes holding a silent question, a question Mia was afraid to answer. Before she could respond, he turned away and focused on his coffee again. Mia's heart pounded in her chest, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She had to stop this. She couldn't let herself get lost in thoughts she knew were wrong. But how could she ignore the pull? How could she ignore what she was feeling? This story is about to take a turn. If you're intrigued, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for more. Your support means the world. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment. The next few days passed in a blur. Mia tried her best to act as though everything was normal, but it was impossible to ignore the growing tension between her and Max. Every time they were alone, the space between them felt smaller, as if the invisible line that had always kept them safe and distant was slowly dissolving. Max, despite his confident exterior, seemed equally aware of the shift. He became quieter around her, his eyes lingering just a little too long when he thought she wasn't looking. It was clear that something had changed. Both of them knew it, but neither of them was willing to address it. One evening, after Ben had retreated to his office for another late-night work session, Mia found herself in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. The house was quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards the only sounds in the stillness. She felt her nerves tightening as she tried to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept wandering back to Max. The door to the kitchen creaked open and she froze. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Need help with dinner?" Max's voice was casual, but there was an undertone of something more. A quiet, unspoken invitation to something Mia wasn't sure she was ready to face. Mia turned, forcing a smile, trying to act as though she hadn't been thinking about him non-stop. I've got it, thanks. Max stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. She could feel his warmth, smell the faint hint of cologne on his skin. She gripped the spoon tightly, trying to steady her hands as they trembled slightly. The room felt charged, like a storm was building on the horizon. Are you sure? Max asked, his voice softer now. I don't mind helping. Mia swallowed, her throat dry. She could feel the pull between them, magnetic and irresistible. She tried to take a step back, but her feet seemed to be rooted to the spot. Her heart pounded in her chest. I'm fine, Mia said, forcing the words out. You should relax, Max. You've been working hard. Max tilted his head slightly, studying her with those deep, knowing eyes. I'm fine too, Mia. Just can't stop thinking about the changes here. About everything that's happened since I got here. Mia's stomach clenched. She didn't know what he was referring to, but she could feel the weight of his words, the way his gaze didn't leave hers. You're just staying for a little while longer, right? Mia asked, her voice softer than she intended. Max didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. Maybe, but it doesn't feel like just staying anymore. I feel like I've been here a lot longer than just a few weeks. Mia felt the blood rush to her head, her thoughts scrambling. This was wrong. They shouldn't be this close. She shouldn't feel this way. But it was too late. The words she couldn't bring herself to say hung heavily between them. Max reached out, placing his hand on the counter beside hers, effectively trapping her in place. She could feel the heat radiating off his body. His voice dropped lower, the intimacy of his words causing her to shiver. I know you feel it too, Mia, he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. The tension. The way things have changed between us. Don't tell me you don't feel it. Mia closed her eyes, her chest tightening. She wanted to pull away, to push him back, to tell him that this was wrong. But she couldn't move. She couldn't bring herself to say the words that would put an end to the storm building between them. Max, we can't. Mia started, but her voice faltered. Max's eyes darkened, and for a moment, it felt like the world around them ceased to exist. Why not? He asked, his voice soft yet firm. Tell me why we can't. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Mia's mind screamed at her to stop, to push him away, to remember who they were. But her body betrayed her. She felt herself leaning in, the tension between them becoming unbearable. The sound of the front door opening broke the moment. They both froze, and Max quickly stepped back, his face unreadable. Mia felt a sharp pang of guilt but couldn't help the relief flooding through her. Ben, Mia whispered, turning toward the door, trying to act casual. Max gave her one last, lingering look before quietly exiting the room. Mia's heart was still racing. She forced herself to turn back to the counter, her hands shaking as she tried to regain her composure. Ben's cheerful voice filled the room as he entered, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed between Mia and his son. The following days felt like a blur for Mia. She kept busy with her usual routines, trying to avoid being alone with Max for too long. But it was impossible. Each time they crossed paths, the air seemed to crackle with electricity. The small cottage felt like it was closing in around her, the walls closing in with every lingering look and accidental touch. She couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. Max, for his part, seemed more distant, but there was a new intensity in the way he watched her. It wasn't the playful young gaze she remembered from when he was a teenager. Now it was something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand. One evening, after Ben had retreated to his study for a late night of work, Mia found herself in the living room, sitting by the fireplace, the soft glow of the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She had tried to distract herself with a book, but her mind kept drifting back to Max. His eyes, his touch, the way he seemed to invade her thoughts when she least expected it. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her heart skip a beat. She didn't have to turn around to know it was him. Max entered the room, his presence filling the space with an intensity that took her breath away. He was wearing a simple sweatshirt and jeans, but there was something different about him tonight, something urgent in the way he looked at her. Can we talk? His voice was low, steady, yet there was an undeniable edge to it, a seriousness that made her stomach twist. Mia set the book down and stood up, trying to steady herself. She nodded, though her heart was racing in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, and secretly longing for. Max walked closer, and the distance between them seemed to vanish. The air felt thicker, charged with emotions they had both been suppressing for too long. He stopped just a few feet away, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can't stop thinking about you, Mia," he said softly, his words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to deny it, wanted to push him away, but the truth was, she felt it too. The attraction, the pull. It had been building for weeks, and now it was impossible to ignore. "This is wrong," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "You're Ben's son. I'm married to him." Max stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if to touch her. He didn't, but the gesture was enough to make her skin prickle. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice rough. "But it doesn't feel that way, Mia. Feels real. It feels right." The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her, and Mia closed her eyes, trying to regain some sense of control. But it was slipping through her fingers like sand in the wind. "Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This can't happen. We can't." Max stepped forward, his body now inches from hers. The tension between them was unbearable, and Mia could feel her resolve weakening. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her skin, sending a jolt of heat through her. "I don't care about what's right or wrong anymore," he murmured, his voice low and urgent. "I care about what I feel, what we feel. Mia, we can't keep pretending it's not happening." Her heart pounded in her chest, and she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. For a brief moment, everything felt clear. The line between right and wrong had blurred beyond recognition, and Mia was no longer sure where it ended. "Please," Max whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "Tell me you feel it too." Mia's mind screamed at her to pull away, to stop this before it went too far. But her body betrayed her again. She could feel the pull between them, stronger than any moral boundary. She reached out without thinking, her hand brushing against his chest, her breath shallow and rapid. But just as she was about to speak, the sound of the front door opening interrupted them. Ben's voice, cheerful and oblivious, echoed from the hallway, pulling Mia out of the haze that had enveloped her. Max immediately stepped back, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark with unspoken thoughts. Mia quickly turned away, trying to calm the rapid beat of her heart. Ben appeared in the doorway, smiling as he noticed them both standing in the living room. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice light. "Nothing," Mia replied quickly, her voice betraying none of the storm raging inside her. Just talking." Ben smiled, completely unaware of the storm that had passed between them moments ago. "Well, don't stay up too late," he said casually. "I've got an early meeting tomorrow." Mia nodded, forcing a smile, but inside her mind was spinning. She glanced at Max, who had already turned to leave. His eyes locked on hers for a brief moment before he disappeared down the hallway. The air in the room felt thick with tension, and Mia knew one thing for certain. Things were no longer simple. The line they had crossed was irreversible, and neither of them knew what would happen next. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was irrevocably changed between her and Max. The conversation they'd shared, brief yet intense, played on repeat in her mind. Every touch, every glance seemed to be amplified, as if the air around them was thick with unspoken words. It was getting harder to pretend that things were normal, that the boundaries that had once existed between them were still intact. For the next few days, the tension between Mia and Max simmered beneath the surface. At breakfast, they avoided looking at each other for too long. When they crossed paths in the house, it was with awkward smiles and quickly averted gazes. Mia spent most of her time with Ben, trying to bury the storm brewing inside her. But it was a losing battle. Every time Max's eyes met hers, it was like a spark, a reminder of everything they couldn't have, yet both desperately wanted. One evening after dinner, Mia found herself alone in the kitchen cleaning up. Ben had retreated to his office to work as usual, leaving her to finish the dishes. She tried to focus on the mundane task, but her mind was too occupied with everything that had happened between her and Max. The soft sound of footsteps in the hallway caught her attention. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Can I help? Max's voice was calm, but there was a hint of something else in it, a quiet urgency, as if he knew the tension had been building and was ready to do something about it. Mia hesitated, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. She didn't want to be alone with him. She didn't want to face the impossible situation that had already started to feel like a runaway train. I'm fine, Max, she said, her voice unsteady as she wiped the counter, avoiding his gaze. But Max stepped closer, the space between them closing with each step. I don't think you are, he said softly, his hand brushing hers as he reached for a dish. We both know something's changed, Mia. And I'm not going to pretend it hasn't. Mia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the heat of his body next to hers, the slight pressure of his touch sending a ripple of electricity through her. Max, please. She started, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain this, how to explain that everything she had worked for, everything she had built with Ben was slipping through her fingers. Max's voice was quiet but insistent. I can't stop thinking about you, he said, his tone low and husky. Every time I look at you, every time we're near each other, I feel it. You feel it too. I can see it in your eyes. Mia's chest tightened, her heart racing. She wanted to push him away, to tell him this wasn't right, but she couldn't. Every fiber of her being was drawn to him, like a moth to the flame. I know this is wrong, Max continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this way. Mia closed her eyes, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about her stepson. Max? She whispered, her voice breaking. We can't. This will destroy everything. He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek, sending a wave of warmth through her. I'm not asking for everything, Mia. I just need you to admit that this is real. Before she could stop herself, Mia leaned into his touch, her mind racing, her body betraying her. She opened her eyes and met his gaze, dark, intense, filled with a hunger that mirrored her own. But just as the moment seemed to reach its peak, a loud knock on the front door shattered the silence. Ben's voice called out from the other side, oblivious to what was unfolding inside. Mia? Everything okay in there? Mia's heart stopped. The air between her and Max was thick with tension. They both pulled away as though they had been burned, their faces flushed with the weight of what almost happened. Max stepped back, his expression unreadable. We'll talk later, he said quickly, turning toward the door before Mia could say anything more. She stood there for a moment, frozen in place, as the sound of Max's retreating footsteps echoed in the hallway. Her heart was still pounding, her mind in chaos. What had just happened? How had it come to this? Ben entered the kitchen, smiling as he dropped his bag on the counter. Everything good? He asked, not noticing the storm brewing in Mia's eyes. Yeah, Mia replied, forcing a smile. Just cleaning up. Ben smiled and kissed her cheek before heading to the living room. I'm going to relax for a bit. I'll be out here if you need anything. Mia nodded, her mind still reeling. The guilt, the desire. Everything inside her was screaming for her to stop, to put a distance between her and Max. But deep down she knew it was too late. Something had already been set in motion, and Mia didn't know how much longer she could hold back. 3 days later, the air in the house was calmer, but only on the surface. Mia had thrown herself into errands, chores, and meaningless distractions. Max had kept his distance. Ben, as always, was blissfully unaware. But something between Mia and Max remained unfinished. That Saturday, Ben suggested they all take a short drive along the coast to a nearby artisan town for a local fall festival. A little change of scenery will do us good, he said cheerfully over breakfast. Mia hesitated. Being out of the house together terrified her. But saying no would only raise suspicion. Max, sitting across from her, didn't say much. He simply nodded and sipped his coffee, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second, just enough to say, I know what you're thinking. By early afternoon, they had arrived in the little town nestled between cliffs and sea. The streets were lively with music and laughter, vendors selling handmade jewelry, candles, pastries. Ben wandered into a leather goods shop, fascinated by vintage belts. You two go ahead. I'll meet you back at the car in an hour, he said casually. Mia and Max were alone. They walked in silence past rows of stalls. The cool breeze carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and wood smoke. Mia tried to lose herself in the sights, but every second beside Max felt electric. She could feel the pull again, the one she had tried so hard to deny. "I didn't think this would be so hard," Max said suddenly. She looked at him, startled. "What?" "Pretending like nothing happened," he said, voice low but firm. "Acting like I don't feel what I feel every time I look at you." "Max," she started, but he held up his hand gently. "I'm not trying to start something here," he said. "But I'm tired of pretending. And I know you are too." Mia swallowed hard, her heart aching. "I'm trying to protect what we have. Our family. Your father. This can't happen again." They stopped walking. The crowds thinned around them as they reached the edge of a quiet overlook where the cliffs dropped down to the crashing waves below. The sky was painted in soft amber as the sun started to descend. Max turned to her. "You think I don't know that? You think this is easy for me? I've spent every day trying to forget the way your hand felt in mine. The way you looked at me that night." His words hit her like a gust of wind, strong, undeniable, and impossible to run from. "I know it's wrong," she whispered. "But it felt real. That's what scares me the most." They stood in silence for a moment, only the sound of the waves below. Then Mia did something she hadn't done in days. She let her guard down. "I haven't felt like myself in a long time," she said. "With Ben, everything is comfortable, predictable. But with you, it's like I've woken up from a long, quiet dream." Max stepped closer, carefully, respectfully. "Then don't go back to sleep, Mia." Before she could answer, the sound of Ben's voice calling in the distance brought her back to reality like a splash of cold water. "Mia! Max! Over here. I've got cider." They both stepped back instinctively, the moment folding into itself. Mia turned away quickly, brushing a tear from her cheek before it could fall. She couldn't look at Max. Not now. As they walked back to meet Ben, neither spoke another word. But the silence between them spoke volumes. The drive home was painfully quiet. Ben hummed along with an old folk song on the radio, occasionally commenting on how beautiful the coastline looked under the fading light. Mia nodded, offering small smiles, but her mind was far from the cliffs and sunset. Beside her in the back seat, Max sat still, too still. His gaze was fixed out the window, but Mia could feel it, the turmoil beneath his silence. Neither of them had spoken since the moment at the overlook. And yet everything had been said. Or nearly everything. When they arrived home, the evening routine played out like a silent performance. Mia reheated dinner. Ben went upstairs to check emails. Max disappeared into the guest room. The house that once felt like a safe retreat now felt like a fragile stage, waiting for something or someone to fall through the cracks. Later that night, Mia stood alone in the kitchen, rinsing mugs under warm water. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark kitchen window. Tired eyes, lips pressed tight, shoulders tense. She barely recognized the woman in the glass. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't have to turn around. "Max." She closed her eyes. "You shouldn't be here." "I can't sleep," he said softly. "Then go for a walk," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "But don't stand behind me like this. It's too much." She felt him hesitate. "Do you regret what happened?" Mia turned then, slowly, still holding the wet mug in her hand. Their eyes met. Hers were full of exhaustion. His full of ache. "I regret what it could do to your father," she said, voice almost breaking. "I regret how complicated it's made everything. But what I felt—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't know how to regret something that made me feel alive again." Max stepped closer, his expression pained. "Then why does it feel like you're walking away from it?" "Because that's the only way to protect everyone else." "What about protecting yourself?" he asked, barely louder than a breath. "What about what you need?" His words cut her more deeply than she expected. "I made vows, Max. I built a life. This isn't just about feelings. It's about the people we hurt when we cross lines we can't uncross." He stepped even closer, but stopped just short of touching her. "And what about us? Don't we count too?" Mia's hands trembled, and the mug slipped from her grasp, shattering in the sink. She gasped, more from the sound than the danger, and instinctively reached down to pick up the pieces. Max moved in quickly, grabbing her wrist. "Don't. You'll cut yourself. Their hands locked, not in a gesture of desire this time, but of alarm, of concern, of instinct. Mia looked up at him, her eyes welling. This is what it is, Max, she said. A broken thing we keep trying to carry like it's whole. The silence was unbearable. I'm not asking for forever, he said finally, his voice raw. I'm asking for truth, even if it's just for tonight. A long pause. Then softly Mia answered. The truth is, I don't know how to want something I know I can't have. They stood there, inches apart, the sink between them filled with broken glass, water, and something else neither could name. The sound of Ben's footsteps creaked above them, bringing them both back. Max slowly let go of her wrist. I'll go, he said. But this conversation isn't over. He turned and left the room. Mia stood still, staring at the glass in the sink, as if it might hold an answer she couldn't find in her heart. The next morning, Mia woke up earlier than usual. The house was still dark. The only sound was the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the whisper of wind pushing through the trees outside. For a brief moment she allowed herself to pretend everything was fine, that she was just a woman with a husband upstairs and a guest in the spare room. But she knew better. The night before had cracked something inside her. She hadn't expected Max's words to reach so deeply, but they had. Every syllable still echoed in her head. I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for truth. After making coffee, she stepped out onto the back porch with her mug and a blanket. The morning fog hovered over the yard like a secret waiting to be discovered. And there, standing quietly near the old bench under the maple tree, was Max. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder. Her chest tightened. You're leaving, she said quietly, stepping closer. Max turned, his breath visible in the cool morning air. He gave her a slow, sad smile. I called a friend in Portland last night. He offered me a job. I figured maybe it's time. Mia stood in silence, unsure of what to say. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? Distance. Clarity. A way to return to normal. But nothing about this felt normal. I thought you said the conversation wasn't over, she whispered. Max looked at her, eyes soft but resolute. It's not. But I realized something. If I stay, I'll keep hoping. And hoping for something impossible hurts more than walking away. Mia's throat tightened. So this is goodbye? He stepped closer slowly, like every inch between them mattered. Unless you ask me to stay. Tears burned behind her eyes. I can't. You know I can't. I know, he said. But I had to give you the chance. A pause. The weight of what they weren't saying filled the space between them like fog. Max gently reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. You changed something in me, Mia. I'll never forget that. No matter where I go. Her voice cracked. You changed me too. He leaned in, not for a kiss, not for anything more. Just to rest his forehead lightly against hers, eyes closed. It was the softest kind of goodbye and somehow the most painful. I'll go before Ben wakes up, he murmured. Tell him I left early for a job offer. You don't have to explain. You don't have to protect me. I want to. He gave her one last look, deep, honest, final, then turned and walked toward the driveway. Mia didn't stop him. She couldn't. She watched as he disappeared into the fog, leaving behind a silence more powerful than any confession. And as the sky began to brighten behind the clouds, she wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything she hadn't said. The days after Max left passed slowly. At first, Mia tried to convince herself that things were back to normal. She made breakfast. She laughed at Ben's silly jokes. She watered the plants. She responded to emails. But underneath it all, there was a stillness in her, a quiet that didn't come from peace but from absence. It wasn't just Max who had left. It was a version of herself too. Some nights she would find herself on the back porch where they had said goodbye. The bench under the maple tree was always empty. But sometimes she could still feel him there. In the cold morning breeze, in the smell of wet leaves, in the silence. Ben never asked about Max's sudden departure. He accepted the story easily. He got a job. It was a good opportunity. But Mia could feel the subtle shift in him. He had started watching her more closely. Not with suspicion but with concern. Like he sensed something had changed inside her. And it had. One evening, as Ben sat reading in the living room, Mia walked in and sat across from him. Her heart was pounding, not out of guilt but out of the need for honesty. "I haven't been myself lately," she began. Ben looked up, brow furrowed. "I've noticed. There's a lot I've kept inside," she said softly. "Not because I wanted to lie to you, but because I was confused. About everything. About who I am, what I feel, what I've lost along the way." Ben was quiet for a long moment. Then he set his book aside. "Mia, if there's something you need to tell me, I just need you to know I'm trying to find my way back," she interrupted gently. "Not just to you, but to me. To the person I was before everything started to feel dull. Before I forgot how to feel anything at all." Ben nodded slowly. "I'm still here. I want to help you find her again." Mia looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. There was kindness in his eyes. Maybe he didn't know everything. Maybe he never would. But he knew enough. Enough to stay. Enough to listen. That night, she stood by the bedroom window, looking out at the dark sky. She thought of Max. Not with longing anymore, but with gratitude. What they had wasn't meant to last. It was a mirror, a moment, a spark that reminded her she was still alive. It forced her to confront her emptiness and choose what to do with it. She chose to come home. To herself. To the life she had built, even if it was imperfect. Sometimes love doesn't arrive to stay. Sometimes it shows up just to wake you up, to stir something buried deep. Max was never meant to be her future. But he had reminded her that she still had one. And that was enough. Thank you for watching. That if this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below. What would you have done in Mia's shoes? Like if this story made you feel something. Subscribe for more emotional, thought-provoking stories every week. Let's keep exploring the complicated beauty of the human heart together. Until next time.